Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Forward GC. Today we're bringing on Jordan Schwartz. Jordan is an attorney on Lawtrades and runs his own firm. He previously served as general counsel of Meta, one of the earliest startups making augmented reality headsets, where he helped the company scale 10x and raise well over $100 million until it was acquired in 2018. We're recording this episode on May 19th, and just in April alone, the legal industry shed about 65,000 jobs. This episode will help those lawyers that are thinking of branching out and setting up their own shop, regardless of whatever practice area you serve. And since Jordan now regularly works with general counsels and served as one himself, he's going to offer his take on navigating the current challenges legal departments are facing. Jordan, welcome to the pod.
Hey, Ashish. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Likewise. So to get started, in a very short span of time, you've had the big law experience, the GC experience, and now you have a thriving law practice. How did this all happen? Can you walk us through what that journey was like after finishing law school?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of folks coming out of law school, looked to cut my teeth in big law in New York. So I started out, fortunately, working with Jones Day there. This happened to be during the kind of Great Recession, so 2009, 10, and kind of the initial recovery years after that. So at that point, there was a lot of kind of corporate finance, banking, regulatory work out there. But what was really interesting to me was there was a very rapidly changing legal landscape happening, obviously with the Dodd-Frank legislation, various Fed rules, and all sorts of new laws and regulations that were coming into place. And I kind of quickly realized that the kind of model that the law firm had set up for itself, not just Jones Day in particular, but really I think applicable to most of big law, especially at that time, was becoming a bit antiquated for what clients were looking for. So very early on, kind of just using a little bit of intuition from the earlier days of the internet, I saw a kind of opportunity to use technology to better service the clients. And so in that case, with kind of laws and regulations changing very rapidly, with many clients having different questions and needs specific to their business, I realized setting up some sort of online tools, a database, more like a wiki or blog, specifically for kind of Dodd-Frank and Fed regulations at the time, as a means to use technology in a way that kind of enables clients to be able to kept up on the latest on their own initiatives without necessarily having to dial into a partner's
right.
Expensive phone line. And so, I think that was probably the first instance where I realized that there was, a lot of, kind of low-hanging fruit for how, lawyers can be utilizing new technologies, new realities to better service clients kind of all around. And quite frankly, to maybe, and probably not in the interest of many of the big law firms, but, maybe help reduce the spend that clients do on the legal side. And so that really became apparent to me early on when I was at Jones Day, but it hit home when I was a few years later and had the opportunity to start as the first in-house lawyer at Meta, as you mentioned in the introduction. When you're the in-house counsel at a startup or really any company, you feel very invested in the team, and budgets are not unlimited. And as much as lawyers like to think highly of themselves, at the end of the day, we're kind of like finance, a lot of other roles. We are necessary operators for the business, and certainly can add value from time to time. We're not necessarily the magic bullet that's going to cause any startup to succeed. With that reality, every young company is going to struggle with the same questions around how do we allocate appropriate budget towards functions like legal, where we're protected, we're securing the most important aspects of our business, but at the same time we're freeing up as many resources as possible to actually push towards engineering and product and growing the business
right.
On the top line. And so that really hit home to me, the extreme need and the void that was kind of out there. This is back in 2013, 2014, 2015, where, the options for a lot of companies like the one that we were working with the big law firms, whether in New York or Silicon Valley. They do a good job of scooping up early business, making their practice sound relevant and important to young founders who don't necessarily know any better. But kind of coming into that situation, you see that those bigger law firms, they're billing out young companies like they're billing out their Fortune 500 companies,
Right.
and they're certainly not giving them the same level of attention because, let's be honest, a company that's funded with $10 or $20 million of private capital is not necessarily going to generate the same business for a law firm that a multi-billion-dollar long-standing business will. So
Right.
not only are you getting billed out at exorbitant rates, but you're often getting fed, your work is being fed to junior associates who have limited experience and sometimes even need to have their work double checked, kind of reducing further the benefits of that model. So, it was really hit home for me, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners who themselves might have experienced working in smaller private companies as in-house counsel will certainly agree with. There's just a big void. And it wasn't until I think companies like Lawtrades started popping up that enabled contract attorneys like myself to find a niche in that void, to try to provide the same level of service and expertise for the clients, but at a rate that was much more manageable given their budgets, and also with an attentiveness that they know that I'm doing the work that they are giving to me at my firm. It's not necessarily being fed to our first or second year. So I think in total, as we'll kind of get into more detail, there are just a lot of economic efficiencies with how the traditional law firm model was established and how it evolved over the last half century. Like with a lot of industries, we're seeing young entrepreneurs figure out ways to disrupt that in a way that is more economically efficient for everybody and hopefully provides better service too.
For sure. And that's a great take. One of our big bets is that practices like yours are really the future of the legal industry and will ultimately, disrupt big law, whatever you want to call it, disruption, and traditional boutique firms to an extent. And to my understanding, you have no employees. You work from wherever you want. It's been, I think, a year into your practice so far?
Under a year, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to get your 2 cents on how you're enjoying it. What are the perks? Some of the challenges that you've had to overcome when getting started. I think that would be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was definitely a change of pace, having the big law background and then working in-house for 5 years. But, I think being in-house also helped train me to be more independent as an operational lawyer, because even though I grew a small team while I was there at Meta, the first couple of years I was the only in-house attorney. And when you're in that situation, not unlike, right now when you might be running a solo practice, you're kind of, met with a host of different issues you have to address. You have to develop different layers of expertise. And very importantly, too, you have to develop ways of communicating with different types of clients. Sometimes not, obviously not always strictly legal lawyer clients. It could be, an engineer, a product person, et cetera. And so those are all important skill sets that I think are not necessarily well honed, at least early on in a law firm, but once you work in-house, you really start to develop. And now, as outside counsel, I'm kind of able to take that to each of my separate clients and sort of making that adjustment. The biggest worry or concern initially was just how quickly, we start to develop kind of a bench of clients, a stable quality clients that you enjoy working with, that are doing interesting things, but at the same time, you're still running a business. You still need to, make your ends meet at the end of the day. So trying to make sure that you kind of have that, both building that initial stable up and then maintaining it, because the other thing too, as you know, where you're dealing with any clients over an existing period of time is, those relationships can change for reasons outside of your control. A client could be acquired, as we saw last week, or a client, could go out of business in worse scenarios, or just some much more innocuously, they could, decide to hire a full-time in-house, additional full-time in-house counsel and kind of relieve some of the necessary work they need to kind of be farming outside. So those are all kind of the considerations, I think, but those are part and parcel with running a legal practice, not necessarily specific to being a solo practice,
Right.
with the exception that obviously as a solo practitioner, you can't necessarily look to your partners to help kind of fill any gaps or supplement any work product you need. And so that's where I think partnering with companies like Lawtrades that kind of take on a lot of that client relations side of the business, a lot of that kind of marketing and outreach side is extremely helpful. It kind of frees me up to focus on the legal work, which is where I kind of enjoy spending most of my time anyway, and but at the same time have a steady stream of interesting opportunities that can evaluate and continue to grow the business.
Right, right. And how would you say your previous roles set you up for what you have now? Like, I know you touched on it briefly. And aside from your skill set, why do you think you've been able to attract clients and, more importantly, keep them around?
Yeah, so I think having a diversity of experiences and flexibility in terms of addressing legal matters is critical, especially when you're dealing with smaller clients that have one or two full-time in-house lawyers, which basically all my clients do. So anyone in those situations, anyone who's been in those situations knows that you're going to come up. You might have spent your time in a law firm developing expertise in M&A or tax or whatever it might be. But in a company, especially when you're the only in-house lawyer, but even on a small team, you're going to now have to address all sorts of issues related to commercial agreements, to IP, to fundraising, to just basic operations and HR issues that maybe a lot of lawyers didn't even think they would want to ever learn anything about, or immigration matters. So having a diversity of experiences is extremely helpful because it both gets you caught up quite quickly on a variety of areas of law beyond whatever your core expertise is. It kind of gives you the confidence and kind of the reps of going through the motions with discrete types of agreements that you might not see 100 of, but it's kind of good background knowledge to have. And then, as I alluded to before, the ability to kind of take that information and distill it for not just for your partner, as you might do at a law firm, or not just for your the client that your partner has a relationship with, but with everyone throughout the organization, from the secretary to the EA to the junior software engineer, and then up the chain, of course, to your mid-level managers, your VPs, and your C-level suite. So. And of course, ultimately to the board of directors as well, and to shareholders. So you have to hone not just your ability of being able to analyze almost any issue under the sun, but at the same time, distill and communicate that to a variety of different personalities within any company, which each personality type or each role type is going to demand its own layer of kind of granularity or specificity, or just language. Just when you're talking to a hardware engineering manager and they're dealing with a vendor in China, they're going to be using acronyms and terms that are not going to be familiar to someone who does privacy negotiations on behalf of an app company in the U.S. So there's just like a kind of a nomenclature and an ability to understand where what the business needs are in each area of the business. That then kind of enables you enables me in my practice now to take that on and be able to now work with a variety of clients from, companies that are developing some, new hardware technology, or some app company or some SaaS company, whatever it might be. Having had that kind of experience, both in diversity of issues, but also communicating with different types of folks is extremely helpful. And I maybe as you kind of grow up the chain in a bigger law firm and you kind of spend some time as a partner, you can develop some of that too. But, I'm just not quite sure you can ever get that kind of rapid fire experience, the breadth and the depth of it, as quickly as you can if you kind of move in-house. So I would say that's the key, kind of enabling a lot of the growth in the practice. And then, that in turn has enabled me to both kind of attract a diversity of clients. And I assume that, the quality of the work product, combined with, a personality that hopefully jives with, what my clients are looking for from outside counsel, the combination of that seems to, I guess, work for them in a way that they're happy to continue working with me.
Right. Yeah, that's super helpful. And I'm just super curious as well, what's a typical day like for you now that you have your own practice?
it's, wake up in the morning, check emails. I mean, not too dissimilar from what I was doing as in-house counsel. Then, you kind of have, I got to have my calendar set up, so to speak, where each of my clients will kind of notify me with their needs, either weekly or quite frankly, daily. I have a kind of a set allotment of time that I'll dedicate towards each client, in a given day or during the week. But at the same time, I try to be responsive to where their business needs are, because part of their value of working with a lawyer like myself is expectation or a confidence that issues will get managed, not just competently, but pretty quickly. Rather than sometimes when you're dealing with some bigger law firms, you kind of just have to go with the flow of where their client needs are. And so I kind of have my kind of schedule allotment, so to speak, based on my agreed upon terms with different clients, and I try to just stick to that and build in a little bit of flexibility so that if a particular client has a urgent deal that might not have been quite what they were expecting, or it happens to be a time of year where where the demands of their business are much higher. So, like for example, if you're selling a piece of hardware through retail, normally around Black Friday and those type of big holiday seasonal moments. Those are very important moments, lots of deals happening around then. And so the expectation will be there's a lot more uptick in work at that point. So I just try to be upfront with the client at the kind of onset of the engagement, and then maintain a level of communication and trust where, we just have the same expectations around how much time they're expecting me to dedicate to them, how much time I can commit, and then just, communicating as we proceed if we think that's going to vary. So, I said that word communicate a couple of times, but I think that's a very big part of it. And I alluded to the experiences back in as a GC where, you're communicating a lot with all aspects of the organization. And I think one of the biggest, areas of advice I could probably give to younger lawyers or lawyers thinking to strike out on their own is to, if they haven't already developed communication skills with clients, of course, in particular, try to put yourself in positions where you can do so, because, it's not necessarily like everyday conversation, and it's not necessarily like talking to your partner within the law firm, as a junior associate. It's going to be quite a bit different. The types of answers they want are going to be different. The type of information, and the way they want that information communicated is going to be different. And ultimately, as a lawyer, you're in a service industry. You're in a well-paid, well-respected profession, but ultimately it is a service industry, and you should, adjust and attune your practice and everything that goes into it to what better serves the client.
For sure.
And
yeah, for sure. And knowing what you know now after being in big law and being a GC and now running your own firm, what's your take on the future of the practice of law, and what are some of the inefficiencies that you see being exploited? How do you think the practice of law changes, over the next few years and looking even further along?
I mean, it's a very good question, and one we've personally discussed quite a bit and continue thinking about more. I'll say one first caveat is just it's going to vary from practice area to practice area. I mean, certain aspects of the law, like litigation, I don't necessarily see changing dramatically.
Right.
Certain specialties in law, like tax, especially when you're dealing at the corporate tax level, or M&A for that matter, when you're dealing at the kind of corporate level. I don't necessarily see that being able to shift much, partially because of demands that those sort of bigger transactions or deals have, meaning that you have to pull on, more lawyers with more of an expertise and just, than just one or two people.
Right.
But also there's obviously a pervasive CYA mentality within the culture, within the corporate culture. So any company, any GC of a company is not going to be able to justify having a solo practitioner manage a multi, tens of billions of dollars a deal or whatever.
Right.
they're going to they're going to want to pay top dollar for whoever to handle it, for Skadden to handle it, because even if the deal goes awry, they'll point to, well, we paid the most, you bought the best firm, and what else can I do?
Right.
So, and obviously the exact opposite would be true if they went with a solo person and things went awry. So so I think there are structural reasons why we won't see certain practice areas evolve tremendously. But I think certainly areas like the one I'm kind of specializing in, where it comes to commercial and product counsel, is certainly ripe for it, because a lot of what I'm working on and what our what our clients need is often a kind of overflow of work, but one that's kind of more repeated, kind of based on where their business is. The transactions and the negotiations, individually are not necessarily, huge or going to make or break the business. So there's kind of a reduced liability concern, of course, there. Mm-hmm. But, more importantly, they're not necessarily the types of transactions that are going to necessitate a heavy amount of negotiating. I mean, certainly there will be isolated cases here and there, but for the most part, there's, a level of kind of work within companies where it's not necessarily rocket science. It's really just about tailoring, let's say a form agreement or a set of form agreements to what the client's specific business is, where their specific risks are, and then trying to manage both internally and with counterparties, that kind of negotiation, so that when you get to final execution, you're not straying far from your initial starting place. And I think with those, sorts of, with that area of law, there is obviously a void, because there is an economic inefficiency, because the benefit of utilizing a top dollar law firm for that level of work is not really there, because the value add that a law firm that can draw on, the number of expert partners and that brings clout, that doesn't really necessarily help you in a day-to-day transaction. Sure. No counterpart is going to care that Skadden is negotiating some $100,000 deal across from them. Right. And it's kind of overkill, right? So there's certainly a void there economically. And, there are other practice areas too, of course, beyond just kind of the commercial side. I think we're seeing on the IP front, especially when it comes to patent portfolios and just maintaining trademark and copyright registrations. These are areas of the law where you need, competency and level of expertise, but you don't necessarily need to be spending top dollar most of the time, at least when it comes to kind of the day-to-day. And that's where I think contract lawyers are, fill a great void, because we're kind of able to be, available and helpful in our areas of expertise, not necessarily not necessarily overbilling or creating massive expenses for our clients, but at the same time, saving them a lot of headspace, saving them, having to go out and let's say perhaps hire a full-time lawyer, which, in the New York or Bay Area or LA or whatever is going to be, even a junior in-house counsel is going to probably run you a salary in the high 100s. And then on top of that, right. You have all your employer-related expenses. So you quickly get to a couple $100,000 salary just trying to hire a full-time junior lawyer in-house. So that's not necessarily a great solution for a lot of companies. And, as I was alluding to before, paying top dollar for more routine work doesn't really make sense. So there's clearly a void there, and I think we're doing a great job of filling it.
Yeah, for sure. And switching gears here, you're servicing a lot of tech companies, obviously, across a wide range of different industries. What challenges do you think GCs are currently facing across the board, and how would you navigate them in lieu of like the last couple of months, and how that's really affected, sort of the ecosystem?
Yeah, so there's a lot of COVID-19 related challenges out there, and as everyone who's running a business knows, there's numerous sorts of agreements and leases and whole sorts of engagements that were entered into and now need to be unwound or need to be renegotiated because of the changing landscape. So You kind of have your kind of cleanup duty, so to speak, based on kind of where we are with the pandemic and where we think we're going with it. So I think every client of mine, and I'm sure every company in the world basically has been thinking hard and long about various issues related to their business and how to kind of make the adjustments they need. On top of that, when you're in-house counsel and you're a small team or one person, you're also having to potentially manage other kind of risks or downside scenarios to your business. So you got to figure out how to potentially tap into government loans, or how to ensure a safe work environment for your employees once they return to the office. And of course, you have to proactively think about all those issues, analyze them, with your outside counsel, and of course, be able to then distill and communicate that information to your internal team. Because when I was a GC, every GC knows your business side of your team, your CEO, are often going to want to push every button they can to try to get the business back and running. So you have to obviously navigate the needs of the business, again, as always, with this rapidly changing landscape. And it's obviously not easy, because there's no set path, there's no defined path.
Right.
There's obviously tremendous liability looming. How that liability might go play out in the future, who knows? But just thinking about the issue of returning to the workplace. I mean, if all of a sudden your company tells you next week, we want you to come back into the office, what if they're not taking the right precautions? What if, even if they did take the right precautions, you still get sick?
Right.
What if you decide you don't want to go in the office? Are they able to fire you from the job based on that? There's this host of liabilities that there's simply no guidance on. I mean, we have a dysfunctional government right now, not to get political about it, but I think we're all aware. We have a dysfunctional government, and there's simply no guidance for lawyers out there. And so we're maybe all just kind of gritting our teeth and bearing it, and hoping that any such downside scenarios don't play out. But I think the hardest part right now for any lawyers is living with that uncertainty, right? Because as lawyers, we like to try to reduce uncertainty as much as possible. And unfortunately, with a new situation and zero guidance from any legislative body, basically, there's not a whole lot that lawyers can go on. And so some of my clients, they'll take advantage of larger law firms offering free seminars and talks, and obviously that's advisable, especially if it's made easily available to you. And then that's where you'll get a lot more specific experts kind of addressing specific issues in this new circumstance. But even with that, I don't know that would give me a whole lot of comfort as outside counsel, for the same reasons I was saying earlier. You're getting this advice from law firms that's going to be often geared towards a conservative mindset, and not necessarily living with the realities that you might be working at a company that has 12 months of cash runway left. You have a CEO who's breathing down your neck to get people back in the office, and now you have to try to design a plan to execute on that. And of course, that's just one example I'm kind of drawing on, but there are any number of similar examples there. And so it's definitely a scary time, and unfortunately no great answers right now.
Yeah.
But, if, again, kind of riffing on your point before about where perhaps lawyers like us could help, it's, for me, it hasn't been necessarily in answering these sorts of specific questions for clients, because again, I'd be a bit out of my depth too. But it's, being a bit of a sounding board to kind of talk through issues, kind of like I was just doing a bit earlier, but also to help manage the, incredible other workload that is out there. So I think having a trusted lawyer kind of on call, like myself, for my clients has been very beneficial, because now they can spend their time learning about, PPP loans, and learning about, work from home policy issues and all of that, and not necessarily have to be spending, half their day on day-to-day contracts that can, hopefully be managed by someone like myself. So
Right.
I think that's kind of the best use so far, is just having a person available who's there, who's trusted, who knows your company, knows the type of agreements they're working with, and then in these kind of moments of crisis, you can start offloading more and more varied work to them, and allowing you as the point person within the company to do all the diligence and do all the hard work and heavy lifting to answer these difficult questions.
For sure, yeah, and we're seeing it quite often now, where a lot of people are being utilized on Lawtrades to free up time for GCs to handle super high.
Yeah, that was always one of my, even well before the pandemic, was kind of a selling point to clients.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how I wanted them to view me. They all had specific ideas, as you know, with what types of agreements or what kind of work they were looking for in a specific engagement. But, very quickly on, I always want to kind of establish that there is that kind of relationship and trust. And while I can't necessarily handle every type of matter that might come across, there are, a number of different areas that can be helpful. And having that kind of as a resource in your back pocket, as we're seeing now, is incredibly valuable, because, of course, you can try to adjust on the fly, and, that'll take a little bit of a time. But kind of having it in place, I think, is it's both comforting and helps the business continue to kind of keep on chugging along.
Right. And, with that being said, too, there's obviously tens of thousands of lawyers being laid off. I think the number that I saw most recently was like 65,000. And obviously they all come from a lot of different practice areas, some big firms, some small firms, some are working in-house. What advice do you have for them? Because I know there's a lot of those people listening.
Yeah, I guess, no profound advice, but, keep your head down and your spirits high is probably the kind of the most I can offer. I think, like I was just saying, with regards to clients and the current situation, I obviously don't have a crystal ball here with how things are going to play out. I'm confident that once a vaccine is widely available, things will more or less normalize. But unfortunately, as I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, I think the vaccine might be a year plus away. So I think for lawyers maybe who were at least hadn't maybe considered working remotely before, I would say, give it a shot. It might not have the prestige of the law firm attached to it, and it might not be as as exciting perhaps as being the in-house counsel if that's where you came from. But but in a lot of ways, it has the best of both worlds to it.
Right.
And it can very much be the way you make of it. So I'll just kind of elaborate on that quickly. But I think it's a bit of the best of both worlds, because you're, in-house counsel for a company. It's great because you get to really dive in deep with your company, with, the members of the team who you interact with closely, either on the legal side or just throughout the whole business. You feel a part of you're growing something. And if it's a startup, you're growing something from scratch. And it's super exciting. You're creating some new kind of technology. You're trying to change the world. You have, obviously, upside of going public and nice equity options and all that too. So, there's a lot of great aspects of working in-house. And obviously there's a lot of, great aspects of sticking with a larger law firm. I mean, it's a great place to kind of hone a practice. But, I think with kind of working remotely like this, you get a bit of the benefit of both, because the downside, I think, when you're going in-house is, you're very much live or die with the success or failure of that company.
Right.
On top of that, you're going to have restrictions on your budget that could get frustrating. You're going to have executives, who are making unreasonable demands of you. And you're going to be thrust into situations, as the legal counsel, that are not fun situations. I mean, anyone living in the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever, you can guess the type of situations you're talking about. There are things that are going to pop up from time to time within a company that, as a normal person, you don't necessarily want to be presiding over. But nonetheless, as a GC in particular, you're going to be you're the person to deal with it. And on the flip side, with the big law, you're just not going to ever get that same experience of feeling as part of the team, as knowing the company and the business intimately as you would when you're in house. So I think as the kind of remote counsel, you get the benefit of being able to really get to know your clients well, get to understand their businesses, get to work with hopefully a large number of people within them, and to, of course, keep those relationships hopefully ongoing for years. But at the same time, you're not necessarily as tied up with all the dramas and trials and tribulations that any small growing company is going to experience, whether it's around fundraising or around some business issue or around some random lawsuit that pops out of nowhere. Just there's a whole host of issues that any company individual is going to go through, and I kind of enjoy now having a bit of distance from those sort of issues where I can kind of work on the sets of contracts and agreements that I think are most interesting, that are adding value to the business. I can be a sounding board for the clients, and talk through some things with them. But at the same time, there's a nice healthy distance from some of the dramas that, depending on your personality type as a lawyer, you might not necessarily want to deal with all the time. And so that's the advice, I guess, then, would just be kind of open-minded to, if you hadn't considered working remotely before, to how it can actually be quite a beneficial thing, quite a best of both worlds thing. Obviously, we're all working from home now anyway, so that shouldn't factor in much to the equation. And, and hopefully you can get to a point, like myself, where fairly quickly you're building up a stable of clients that, are high quality, that you enjoy working with, that have interesting work, and that you can continue to kind of maintain and grow your practice. Because like yourselves, a year ago when I was first chatting with, Ashish and those guys at Lawtrades, I had very few of my own clients. I was just kind of starting out with the idea of practicing in a solo way. And so I was impressed with their ability to both kind of attract, those early clients, some of quite high kind of stature and reputation. And then obviously with the ongoing relationships, have been very excited by the way they've all kind of played out.
That's awesome. And, slight transition here, because I know you're working with clients that are in the VC space and, you've done that type of work in the past. How do you think the current crisis changes the landscape for a lot of high growth tech companies in general that are, going out there and fundraising now?
You mentioned one of the challenges, obviously, is if you're a private company relying on private sources of funding, your guess is as good as mine of where that market is going. Now, of course, if you're a revenue generating business and you can present, both a stable business and a high growth potential, I don't doubt you're going to find sources of funding even in this environment. The terms might be a little less beneficial, but if you're a strong, stable business, I think you're probably okay. Right. But of course, there's always going to be a large number of businesses that are either just starting out, that are in an R&D phase of their technology, or just plodding along for one reason or the other. And those are the ones I think that are going to have the most trouble, because if private funding, if we go from a period 5 years ago where, places like Silicon Valley, but, really all around the country was flush with private capital, and not just from this country, of course, and the vast sources of wealth within the U.S., but a lot of it coming from Europe and from China. China, of course, has its own issues with investing now, created by the Trump administration, and so that kind of cut off a huge source of funding a year or two ago from a lot of U.S.-based private companies. Right. And now with the double whammy of the pandemic and how investors are likely to be adjusting their mindsets, that'll certainly have some impact. As you mentioned, I was as GC, I'd been intimately involved with the fundraising side of the business, so helped kind of manage several rounds for our company, raising over $100 million from a variety of sources. And so I had a lot of experience talking to investors, going through the motions, even leading some number of meetings and pitches with investors. And I know the low success rate that that often entails, especially when you're early on, when you're kind of a Series A or Series B phase. You're gonna talk to 100 investors, and you're gonna get one or two that are kind of interested in investing, and those ratios aren't necessarily going to adjust much. So I think like anyone who's seeking money, kind of just obviously have to continue kind of pushing on and then try to find those sources of capital for your business. But I think right now with the landscape where it is, where even Warren Buffett can't find a company to invest in, it's going to be tough sledding ahead. And so I think if you're within a company that's in that situation where you're in a year or two of kind of cash runway, and you are expecting to go in the next 12 months to raise a round of capital, I think now's the time to have those difficult discussions around how to cut costs and how to cut costs dramatically, because I think any expectation around funding should, unless you have firm commitments from existing investors, any expectations that new money is going to flow into your business should kind of be thrown out the window for now.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Right.
So again, cutting costs, getting rid of those expensive law firm bills. That's certainly one way to cut costs without hopefully hurting your business at all. Similarly, in other areas of kind of G&A, same deal. But at the same time too, that means laying people off and trying to secure those government loans to help pay for salaries, and just anything you can do to kind of get a hold of needed capital, or to save that capital, because we are in a rainy day, right? It's this is the rainy day that people talk about and that very few actually plan for. And fortunately, I don't see private capital just coming back in a big way until things start to normalize.
Yeah, crazy times, man, for sure.
Yeah.
This has all been really good, Jordan, and I really enjoyed this interview. How could people get in touch with you if they want to connect after hearing this?
Sure. Well, if you're interested in potential engagement, obviously you can connect through the Lawtrades guys. You can also reach me at my email or LinkedIn, for that matter.
Sure.
So I don't know if you can provide a link or something there.
Yeah.
Happy to chat.
Cool. Thanks, man. Thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, no pleasure. Have a great rest of your week.